Hi, I'm Alise Chaffins, and I'm here today with Jon Gunn, the director and co-writer of the film The Unbreakable Boy, coming to theaters on February 21st. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to meet you, Elise.
Nice to meet you as well. Can you talk a little bit about what drew you to this story and how you connected with Scott LeRette?
Yeah, this story was brought to me by one of our producers, Peter Facinelli, who's also an actor in the film. Um, I was doing a slate of films for Lionsgate at the time when COVID hit and shut us down on a number of projects. And I was looking for something to write when I was locked up in quarantine with my family. And I was experiencing a certain amount of gratitude at the time just for all the things I had in life, as we all had this self-reflective moment of being locked up. And this book came across my desk and I read it and was so charmed by it, by the voice and point of view of Austin, this kid who had brittle bone disease and autism and such an exuberance for life. And as a parent, I really related to the struggles of being a parent and feeling often like you're failing and how your own struggles and brokenness can maybe impact your children. And it was a wonderful balance for me at the time of a story that had joy and suffering and comedy and levity and heartbreak. And it just was, I was delighted by it. And so I was looking for something to write that we could make when the world was sort of shut down. And so this was a small enough story. I wrote it very quickly. It immediately got greenlit. Zach Levi read it on a Friday, accepted on a Saturday, and we just all fell in love with Austin and with this family.
Yeah. Obviously taking like a full memoir and then kind of turning it into a film could be difficult. Did you work with Scott on the adaptation, and can you just talk about the process of like making decisions about what makes it into the film and what doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the challenge. And I've written a lot of adaptations and a lot of true stories.
Hmm. Yeah.
And in this particular case, I wrote it. I had met Scott and spoken to him and his family when I was starting the adaptation. But actually, the book had so much great material in it that I wrote it pretty quickly on my own. And then
Mhm.
I just reached out to them and connected with them whenever I needed, like to hear their voice or to ask questions. Um, and then once it was done, they got a chance to read and they could give me comments and feed me more material. It's so great to have that source of inspiration of the real family. So they've been very involved in the process. They were on set visiting us when we were shooting it. They got to watch every edit of the movie as I went. They're just huge fans of it. So it was a wonderful collaboration, but the book really gave me most of what I needed in the adaptation.
Right on. So obviously you worked with Scott. It sounds like the whole family was involved. So you have the like perspective of the parent of an autistic child. Were you able to work with autistic people as well in the creation of this film to give their perspective?
Definitely. I mean, I actually have a number of people in my life with autism and a number of friends who have children with autism. The real Austin himself, Scott's
Yeah.
actual son,
Right, right.
was,
Yeah.
uh, and then we also had a number of autism consultants, both in the process of writing and also in on production on set every day. And so, it's interesting. Autism, so many people are impacted or have somebody in their life who's got autism. And there's a saying that like if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. Like these are all just different people with their own personalities and their own experiences and their own worldviews. Some people with autism are nonverbal and some are very verbal. Austin happens to be very verbal. I love that about him because I'm very verbal. And he has such a great voice, and I love the way he talks and I love the way he thinks. And so it was a joy. And I thought early on, like, I want that voice in the story. So what if he narrated the story of his parents? And so, yeah, I've been very hopeful that the autism community, the people who are impacted by autism and have autism would love this story because it's such a love letter. Um, and I think in many ways, autism hasn't been represented very well in media or very often, and certainly not with a point of view and a narration from a person with autism. So I'm hoping that it's received the way that we want it to be. But I will say that we took great pains to make sure that we brought in as much perspective as we could from authentically from people with autism.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about this a little bit. I think one of the interesting things is when you're talking about autism, there can be a lot of push to fix. And we have this whole thing of a child with osteogenesis imperfecta. So you have this breaking kind of thing that does need to be repaired, but then you also have autism that is a thing that is just part of who a person is and isn't necessarily a fixed thing.
Right.
And so can you talk about just kind of like balancing those two
Yeah.
like perspectives?
Yeah, that's such a great question because it's so much what we explore in the story. And it's also important to keep in mind the context. Like this was a movie that took place in this story from the 90s into the early 2000s. And a
Right.
lot has changed in the last 30 years about people's understanding of autism and perspective about it. And so, you're right. These parents early on were like, oh, is there something wrong with my child? This is something that I need to fix. And the lesson learned, I think, in so many ways by Scott is that Scott himself as a parent was broken in a lot of ways. Like, you know, his he struggled with alcoholism and depression in many ways. Um, and his ambition to sort of have a better career often left him unsatisfied with the life that he had. And then he had this boy that he was pouring his attention into thinking, what's wrong with him? Do I need to fix him? And eventually learned there's nothing that needs to be fixed about my son. But the gift is that there's things about me that need to be fixed. And I gained so much healing from the point of view and the perspective that my kid has on the world. This particular child with autism happens to be a kid with an exuberance for life and happens to be a kid with a perspective that every day can be the best day of your life. And so that helped to heal Scott in so many ways. And I think that's also a trap about stories about autism. Autistic people aren't people that are magical talismans that are meant to fix, neurotypical people. It's just that in this particular case, Austin did so much for his parents and helped them to see the world in a way that was really beautiful. And I loved that about the essence of who Austin is.
Yeah. Can you just, as we're kind of like wrapping up here, what's the primary message that you would want audiences to kind of take away from this film?
For me, this is a story about gratitude.
Mm,
And in this particular case, a family, well, struggling, first of all, because they got pregnant when they weren't prepared.
right.
They didn't know how to be parents. And Scott was dealing with, as I said, struggling with addiction in a lot of ways, but and trying to figure out how to be good parents. And in the process of doing all of these things, they have a child that helped them to see that every day can be the best day of their life. And so I hope people watch this film because it's filled with joy, it's filled with laughter, it's filled with charm, and even in the difficulties and the breaks and the heartbreak, there's so much gratitude at the heart of this film. And so that's what I hope people take from it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking a minute to talk with me today.
Thank you, Alise. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a great day.